What if your ability to sense the truth beneath people's words wasn't a gift, but a trap? Some minds are born different, not louder, not smarter, but sharper in silence. They notice what others miss. They feel what others bury. They carry truths that were never spoken, yet weigh heavily every single day. There's a rare type of person who can read a room without anyone saying a word. They can spot a lie hidden behind a smile, or sense a storm in someone's soul before the clouds ever form. That's not magic, that's perception. And it's far more dangerous than most people realize, especially for the one who carries it. This isn't about personality tests or labels. It's about what happens when your mind functions like a radar, constantly picking up signals that no one else even knows exist. You don't choose to feel everything, you just do. And over time, it starts to blur the line between insight and overload. Machiavelli would have called this accursed brilliance, because power without strategy is a blade without a hilt. It cuts everything, including the one who wields it. So if you've ever felt like your depth isolates you, or like no one really understands what you carry inside, you're not alone. And more importantly, you're not broken. In this video, we're going to explore what happens when perception becomes too sharp, when the mind turns inward, digging so deep into truth that it loses sight of the ground. But we're not just diagnosing the pain. You'll learn how to wield your perception with precision, influence, and control, like a strategist, not a sponge. This isn't self-help fluff or vague advice. You'll get a brutal, honest map of the internal traps that break intuitive minds, and the 3 stages of transformation that can free you. No sugarcoating, no mysticism, just clarity, strategy, and the kind of wisdom that creates silent leaders, not noisy followers. So before we begin, ask yourself one thing. Are you ready to stop hiding your gift and start mastering it?
The dangerous gift of perceiving too much. Some people walk into a room and feel something shift. They don't need proof, words, or logic. They just know. Not because they want to, but because their mind doesn't ask permission. It's tuned to something others can't name. And that gift, while powerful, has sharp edges that cut inward. Perception that deep doesn't come with instructions. No one teaches you what to do when you feel lies in someone's tone or danger in someone's smile. You start questioning yourself. Did I imagine that? But time proves you didn't. The breakup you sensed, the betrayal you foresaw, it always unfolds just like you felt it would. Machiavelli would call this an invisible advantage, a weapon that can predict movements, spot weakness, and anticipate collapse. But he would also warn, power without discipline turns perception into paranoia. The more you see, the more you must choose what to act on and what to leave in silence. You begin to hide what you know, because every time you try to explain it, people get uncomfortable. They dismiss you, or worse, they fear you. So, you keep it in. You play along. You let them talk, knowing exactly what's really going on. And with every silent observation, you become something dangerous, aware, and alone. This isolation isn't about being misunderstood, it's about being unrelatable. You don't just think differently, you see reality from behind the curtain. And once you've seen what's behind the curtain, it's hard to pretend the illusion matters. but pretending becomes survival. You adapt your mask while your mind stays awake. Still, that mental sharpness doesn't sleep. It keeps watching, catching micro-expressions, hidden agendas, emotional shifts. At first it feels like a superpower, but over time you realize it's also exhausting. Because when no one else sees what you see, your clarity turns into a burden, and the weight of knowing starts to bend your spine. But the real problem isn't what you see, it's what you start to lose: your connection to the present, your sense of ease, your peace. And that's exactly where the descent begins, when perception becomes a trap and your mind starts living in a reality no one else can enter.
The cost of perception. Isolation behind the eyes. There's a quiet cost to seeing what others ignore. At first, you think your gift will bring connection, make you the one people trust. But the opposite happens, themselves from you. It's not that you're wrong, you're just too right, too often. Your observations are sharp, unsettling, hard to digest. People say you overthink, read too much into things, take life too seriously. But deep down, you know they just don't want to be seen that clearly. Most people would rather be accepted than understood. Machiavelli would have smiled at that. He knew people don't want truth, they want comfort. And those who threaten comfort become outcasts. That's why your gift starts to isolate you, not because it fails, but because it succeeds. You see through facades, you sense motives. You walk alone, not out of choice, but out of clarity. At some point, you stop sharing what you feel. You learn to listen, nod, pretend. You create a persona that fits into shallow conversations, while your real thoughts stay buried. This dual life keeps you functional, but it also makes you lonely, because while everyone else chats freely, you're carrying what no one else can even sense. That loneliness isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just a moment of silence in a room full of people where no one notices what you're enduring. You start shrinking yourself, not to survive, but to stay tolerable, because your presence, your insight, your emotional depth, it intimidates the average person. And slowly, you begin to feel like you live in two realities. One outside, full of masks and noise, and one inside, full of patterns, meanings, warnings. But you can't live in both forever. Eventually, you start losing track of which one is real. And that confusion, that's the start of fragmentation. What you once saw as a strength now feels like exile. The gift that could have made you a leader has made you an outsider. But this isn't the end. There's something more dangerous than isolation. When you begin to absorb what isn't yours and carry it like it is.
The weight of absorption. When others' pain becomes yours, you don't just observe emotions, you absorb them. You walk into a room and suddenly your chest tightens, your mood shifts, your energy drains. But it's not yours, it's theirs. The anger in the corner, the anxiety across the table, the sadness behind the smile, and now you're carrying it without consent. This is the curse of hyper-empathy. You feel things that don't belong to you. It blurs the boundary between perception and invasion. You're not just intuitive, you're porous. Other people's wounds leak into your system, and before long, you forget where they end and you begin. That confusion is invisible, but it's devastating. Machiavelli would call this a loss of control. And he was clear, when you stop controlling your environment starts controlling you. Emotional absorption without discipline makes you a servant to other people's chaos. You become the filter for everyone else's pain while neglecting your own. The worst part? It feels noble, like you're helping, like you're the strong one who can handle it. So you keep absorbing, keep showing up, keep carrying the emotional weight of the room. But it's not strength, it's self-erasure. Over time, it erodes your clarity, your energy, your sense of identity. There's a difference between being sensitive and being invaded, between compassion and codependency. And when you don't draw that line, you start to shapeshift to survive. You mirror people's feelings, you take responsibility for fixing what's broken, and you lose sight of what you were supposed to build for yourself. The fix isn't withdrawal, it's mastery. You need rituals that ground you, daily journaling, breathwork, touch-based routines like gardening or cooking. These aren't escapes, they're anchors. Because if you don't anchor, you'll drift into emotional storms that were never meant for you in the first place. And here's the deeper danger. When you carry too much for too long, you begin to act on feelings that aren't even yours. And that leads to something even more destructive, when your identity starts to fracture and the unconscious takes the wheel.
When the mind splits, living in two realities at once. There comes a moment when your inner world becomes more vivid than the outer one. You begin to drift, not because you're weak, but because your sensitivity has nowhere safe to land. The external world feels shallow, so you retreat inward, where meaning still lives, and chaos quietly grows roots. You start catching yourself in conversations, mentally somewhere else. People talk, but your thoughts are decoding deeper layers. You smile, but inside you're unraveling patterns, analyzing micro-behaviors, bracing for unseen consequences. It's not distraction, it's dual existence. One foot in reality, one in the symbolic. Machiavelli knew the cost of divided focus. He warned, when a leader becomes too consumed by inner vision, he risks losing command of outer strategy. In your case, you haven't lost intelligence, you've lost grounding. You're so aware of what might happen that you stop being present with what is. This split can be subtle. You still function, you still go to work, pay bills, reply to texts, but underneath, your soul is stretched thin. You start to feel like a ghost, seen but not known, speaking but not heard. The more aware you are, the less you seem to belong, and that's where the fracture deepens. To cope, you might turn to escapism, fantasy, overthinking, compulsive learning, daydreaming about better timelines. But escapism dressed as enlightenment is still escape. You begin mistaking insight for action, and while your mind climbs towers of meaning, your feet forget to touch the ground. The antidote isn't denial, it's integration. Use what you see internally to inform real-life movement. Start small. Implement one idea you've been thinking about for months. Call the person you've analyzed in silence. Make the decision you've long avoided, because knowledge without movement becomes mental decay. And if this duality persists too long, the danger intensifies. You stop trusting reality altogether. You begin to wonder, Is what I feel more real than what I live? And that's the question that pulls you into the next trap, the war between insight and instability.
The collapse of trust, when reality feels like a lie. At a certain point, your awareness becomes so heightened that nothing feels authentic anymore. Every smile feels rehearsed. Every compliment feels like manipulation. You begin scanning every word, every glance for hidden motives, not because you're paranoid, because your instincts have rarely been wrong. You've caught too many lies, watched too many masks slip. You've seen people say one thing and do another, so often that trust begins to rot at the root. Machiavelli warned that trust, when given blindly, is suicide, but when withheld from everyone, it becomes a prison. You start questioning not just others, but reality itself. Conversations lose meaning. Relationships feel like performances. Even joy seems suspicious, like it's trying to trick you into relaxing so it can vanish again. This isn't depression, it's disillusionment. And when the truth starts tasting bitter, you know you've crossed a line most people never even see. You might keep smiling, keep showing up, but inside, you've checked out. You begin operating from calculation, not connection. You manage people like chess pieces. You listen for weakness, not truth. It's not cruelty, it's defense, a strategy to survive a world that rewards pretense more than sincerity. The danger is this mindset works. You get sharper, more strategic, harder to manipulate. But you also get colder, less open, less human. You stop letting people in, not out of fear, but out of data. Your mind builds walls so efficiently you forget what it's like to be vulnerable without being on alert. And here's where the tragedy begins. You don't even realize you're lonely. You're not craving company, you're craving safety, but you've seen too much to believe it exists. So you wear your armor like skin and call it strength. And yet, late at night, you wonder, what would it feel like to actually trust someone again? That question doesn't go away. It just buries itself deeper, waiting for the moment you either collapse or evolve. And that evolution begins where very few dare to look, in the mirror, where your own reflection no longer matches what you used to be.
When self-doubt becomes identity, the implosion of inner authority. There's a silent moment when doubt stops being a thought and becomes a personality. You used to question situations, people, timing. Now you question yourself. Every move you make feels subject to internal scrutiny. You overanalyze your tone, your motives, your presence, and you start to feel like a fraud. This isn't insecurity, it's erosion. The erosion of self-trust after years of sensing more than you could explain. When your truth was dismissed or mocked or misunderstood, you began doing their job for them. You became your own critic, your own doubter, your own suppressor. And now your mind's sharpness is pointed inward. Machiavelli warned that leaders must maintain internal authority, or they become ruled by their own court of doubt.
You've seen what happens when kings lose control of their advisors. In your case, the court is your own thoughts, arguing, undermining, questioning your every instinct. This creates a toxic loop. The more you feel, the less you trust. The more you know, the less you believe yourself. You no longer ask, "Is this true?" You ask, "Is this me?" And when that question becomes chronic, you lose your center. You become reactive, unstable, hesitant to make decisions without external validation. To outsiders, you seem smart, reflective, humble, but inside, you're stuck in analysis paralysis. You research endlessly. You play out scenarios in your head 100 ways. You talk yourself out of action, then punish yourself for not acting. And slowly your authority over yourself begins to rot. The solution isn't more thought, it's aligned action. Do something small that honors your gut. End a fake friendship. Say no without explanation. Pursue the project you've been overthinking. The goal is not perfection, it's repair. Because self-trust doesn't return in theory, it returns in motion. But beware, if you delay that motion too long, something else takes over. Not weakness, but numbness. And when numbness sets in, your ability to lead yourself starts slipping through your fingers.
The numbness of survival, when sensitivity shuts down. Eventually, the overload becomes too much. You stop feeling, not because you've healed, but because your system has shut down to protect itself. Your reactions get slower. Your voice gets flatter. You stop caring about things you used to feel deeply. It's not peace, it's armor, and it's heavy. This emotional shutdown isn't obvious. You still go to work, laugh at jokes, reply to messages. But inside, you're disconnected. Nothing penetrates. You're no longer moved by beauty, injustice, or intimacy. It's as if the wires to your soul have been cut, and you're operating on autopilot. Machiavelli wouldn't call this weakness, he'd call it strategic retreat. The psyche, like any empire, closes its gates when enemies breach the walls too often. But if the gates stay closed too long, the kingdom forgets how to welcome life in. That's when numbness stops being a phase and becomes your new identity. You tell yourself you're fine, that emotions are distractions, that detachment makes you stronger. But deep down, you remember what it felt like to care, to cry, to be surprised by joy. And that memory haunts you, not because you miss the pain, but because you miss being alive. This detachment can lead to strange behaviors. You provoke conflict just to feel something. You sabotage peace because stillness feels threatening. You crave intensity, not for connection, but for stimulation. Because when your nervous system is numb, chaos feels more real than calm. The solution isn't to feel everything again, it's to feel something. Start with moments of grounded presence, music that moves you, food that awakens your senses, art that stirs discomfort. Anything that reminds your system it's safe to come back online. Not all at once, but piece by piece. Because if you don't rebuild that bridge to your own emotions, you risk crossing into something even darker. Not numbness, but apathy. And apathy is where empires fall, from within,
without a single enemy striking.
The rise of the shadow, when repression becomes your power. When you suppress parts of yourself for too long, they don't disappear, they mutate. The kindness you silenced turns cold. The anger you buried becomes sharp. The desires you denied take darker forms. You don't lose your power, you just stop recognizing it. And the shadow begins to take the lead. Carl Jung called this the shadow self. Machiavelli would call it a hidden weapon. What you repress doesn't vanish, it gathers interest. And one day, when your mask slips or your patience breaks, it erupts, not gently, not politely, but with precision. And that eruption is rarely rational, it's strategic rage. You might start setting boundaries but harshly, speaking truth but without compassion, acting strong but fueled by old wounds. It looks like growth, but it's still reaction. And this reaction, if left unchecked, becomes domination. Not over others, but over your own softness, your own humanity. The tragedy is the world respects this version of you. It rewards your edge, your silence, your intensity. People start calling you powerful, but what they really mean is you've become emotionally inaccessible. You've turned your sensitivity into strategy, your intuition into armor. But power without warmth becomes tyranny. And shadow, when left unintegrated, corrupts your mission. You stop growing for yourself, you grow to protect the pain. You stop connecting, you start calculating. You become someone even you don't fully trust, and yet the world keeps applauding. What's the fix? Not to kill the shadow, but to hire it. Let it inform your strength, not dominate your soul. Use the fire it carries to fuel boundaries, purpose, and presence, but keep your hands on the wheel. Because the moment your shadow drives, you stop being strategic and start being reactive. And if you let the shadow lead long enough, you'll wake up one day surrounded by success, but haunted by disconnection. That's when the real question emerges. Are you leading your life or just defending it?
The isolation of awareness, when wisdom becomes exile. The more you understand, the less you fit in. You start noticing things others ignore, micro-expressions, contradictions, emotional shifts. While they laugh, you calculate. While they speak, you listen beneath the surface. It's not superiority, it's solitude. Because awareness, when unshared, becomes a private exile. You begin withholding, not out of arrogance, but exhaustion. It takes too much energy to explain what you see, too much risk to say what you know. So you nod, smile, play along. But internally, you're miles away, isolated not by walls, but by insight. You didn't choose this exile, it chose you. Machiavelli would say that the visionary is always alone at first. Those who see too far ahead are seen as mad, disloyal, or dangerous. And so, the wise learn to stay silent, not to deceive, but to survive. Silence becomes your cloak, observation your weapon, patience your only companion. You want connection, but you no longer trust ease. Relationships now feel suspicious if they come without effort. Conversations feel empty if they lack depth. You long for someone who sees you, not just your mask, not just your performance, but you've trained yourself to be unreadable. That's the paradox. This isolation isn't always sad, it can be powerful. You build things, you refine your gifts, you master strategy, emotional control, and resilience. But even a fortress needs air. Even a philosopher needs echo. And sometimes your wisdom feels like a room with no doors. So what can be done? Build selectively. Seek out people who speak in layers. Create without expecting applause. And every now and then, risk being misunderstood. Because true leadership doesn't mean hiding your mind. It means using it with precision, even if your voice shakes. And if you never break that silence, there's one risk you can't ignore. You'll become the only one who ever understood you. And that's a loneliness too heavy for even the strongest mind to carry.
The final shift, turning madness into mastery. There comes a moment when your inner chaos either consumes you or becomes your crown. All the overthinking, the hypersensitivity, the emotional spirals, they aren't flaws, they're raw data. And when organized, that data becomes wisdom. What once looked like madness becomes the blueprint of mastery. But the shift isn't magical, it's intentional. You don't wait to be rescued. You decide to convert pain into power. Machiavelli would argue that the most dangerous man isn't the loudest, but the one who turns wounds into weapons, emotion into leverage, and solitude into strength. This shift begins with ruthless clarity. You audit your behaviors, confront your patterns, and accept the truth. No one is coming. No one will feel for you, heal for you, or lead for you. And that truth, though brutal, sets you free. Because now the throne is vacant, and your name is on it. Mastery isn't about perfection, it's about command. Command over your reactions, your inner narrative, your use of time and influence. You still feel deeply, but now you choose where to aim that depth. You no longer spiral, you strategize. You don't suppress, you channel. From the outside, you'll seem different, sharper, colder maybe. But that's not numbness, it's focus. You no longer need to explain yourself. You don't chase approval because your direction is clear. You've replaced craving with vision. That's not ego, it's sovereignty. People may not understand your evolution. Let them talk. You're no longer addicted to being seen. You're committed to being effective. And in a world that rewards noise, your silence becomes unsettling, not because it's empty, but because it's loaded with intent. And once this shift locks in, a new reality opens, one where you're not just surviving the mind, but directing it, not just escaping emotion, but mastering it. And that's where your new path begins, right at the edge of who you used to be.
You're not broken. You're becoming dangerous. Now that you've seen the real cost of seeing too much, of feeling too deeply, of carrying wisdom that isolates more than it connects, it's time to ask yourself, how long will you keep hiding the sharpness you were given to lead? There's no glory in staying silent just to be accepted. No peace in suppressing your intuition just to blend in. You weren't meant to disappear, you were meant to command. But first, you have to stop apologizing for being the one who sees what others refuse to look at. What parts of yourself have you locked away to make others feel comfortable? What instincts have you buried under the fear of being too intense? And more importantly, who benefits from your self-doubt? You don't owe the world a softer version of your brilliance. What you owe is action. Start with one insight from this video. Apply it today, not tomorrow. Even if no one notices, because power, real power, starts privately,
in the decisions no one sees. Now tell me in the comments what truth hit hardest for you today, and which part of yourself are you finally ready to stop suppressing? If this video gave you clarity, subscribe to the channel right now and turn on notifications, not just to keep watching, but to keep evolving. There's a complimentary video on the screen and in the description waiting for you, one that goes even deeper into your transformation. Watch it now, before your mind tries to go back to sleep.